Because there are other certifications you can get, but this is the one that follows what we do in corporate purchasing at PACCAR the closest. Okay, let me get rid of this. All right, so they're going to start out with assessing sourcing plans. And they're going to start with this sourcing process, typical steps in the sourcing process. So when you see these kind of things, these sourcing plans and processes, ISM is a national governing body, nonprofit that does these tests, and they also do some stock market stuff where they survey the purchasing managers every month. But what they're looking at is really the Fortune 500 companies in the United States and Canada. And they're kind of taking an industry average of how each of those companies works their purchasing departments. So when you're doing this, studying this ISM stuff, you're really studying the North American industry average. Now, the MCE, Material Cost Excellence Program, that we do is really specific to PACCAR. That's how PACCAR really wants you to do purchasing. So that's kind of the difference between NCE and this. This is kind of industry average. MCE is very specific to PACCAR. All right, so the sourcing cycle, you got these steps: recognition of needs, specification of the need, which includes the specs, searching for sources, analyzing proposals, negotiating, administering contract, and then looking at supplier performance and getting rid of scraps or surplus. And this last step, we don't really do at PACCAR purchasing. That's really PACCAR, Kenworth and Peterbilt materials. We'll get involved with it, but we don't have the checkbook. So here's the sourcing cycle that ISM is going to go through. They'll go through all of these first steps in this first test. This is part of the second, I think the second test. So identification of stakeholders. And we're using a broad definition of stakeholders. Those that will be affected by or can influence a decision-making process. And we got a little thing here. So this is something that ISM puts out, this monthly metric. And this one is on stakeholder perception of procurement, which is what ISM calls purchasing. And this is really more oriented towards a service industry where the commodity managers, or what they would call category managers, are farmed out to the individual groups like marketing and HR and that type of thing. But it's an interesting article. It's only a few pages if you want to read it. Where am I? Okay. So internal stakeholders, those are people who work for PACCAR, essentially. These are your engineering guys, the materials folks, people at the plant. Those are the organization that need the goods or services being provided. Other members of the organization are affected by the purchase, but may not be end users. So that would be PPD, PACCAR Parts. And then top management within the organization. Those are all internal stakeholders. External stakeholders, they're outside of PACCAR, but they can be affected or can influence the buying decision. So suppliers are the most obvious external stakeholders. End customers that buy our trucks. And we have some unique situations where the trucking customer is one of our biggest customers and also one of our biggest suppliers providing us with trucking services. Other supply chain members, such as 3PLs and customs brokers, which we use, local and national governments, those are always affected by major decisions that a company as large as PACCAR makes. Trade unions, although we have one in Renton, we don't have them elsewhere, but they're still affected by our decisions. And members of the community. So Chillicothe in particular, small town, big factory. The people of that community are very much a stakeholder. So ISM breaks it down into needs versus wants. So you get a purchasing rec from engineering or whoever. And is it a need or a want? So needs are attributes and performance characteristics that the part or service must have to meet the buying organization's requirements. So the needs are what's in your TRS or your spec. What is the thing got to do? Or in a lot of cases, it's just the drawing, build the print. That's the need. We need the part to look like this. Wants are attributes or performance characteristics that would bring additional value but are not required. These are things that your supplier, when they're making deals with you, sending quotes back, offer you some other package deal that may be a good deal, may not. Also, engineering will say, it's not on the spec, but we could use this too, which would be a want. To become a qualified supplier, organizations must meet the needs category. So especially in build to print, which is a lot of our parts, you got to be able to make the parts that will pass PPAP. The wants will be considered during final selection and choosing among suppliers that meet the needs. So they got to have a decent quality and meet PPAP. After that, we can start looking at packages that each supplier is offering. And they'll do this a lot, suppliers, because they don't want to be compared one up on price with their competition. They want to be kind of separate so they don't have to go head to head in price. Supply management professionals often need help from internal stakeholders to identify those attributes that are needs from those that are wants. So this is talking to engineering about their drawings or their TRS spec. Organizational considerations. In the future, it's expected supply management function is what they call purchasing will become an integrator balancing needs of multiple business units and partners, which the more you see outsourcing and the factories, our factories and Boeing factories being final assembly lines, the more this is true. Budget sourcing plans should be developed to ensure that the purchase meets the internal needs, stakeholders' needs, and budgets. And we don't generally get too involved with that. This is engineering and materials. Many operational issues must be considered when developing plans, delivery, timing, packaging, inventory levels, risk. Can the supplier get the part to us on time and pass quality? Strategic sourcing plans must support the buying organization's long-term objectives. So sometimes the internal customers' requirements are not consistent with long-term objectives. So if I'm Walmart, my supply base is going to look a whole lot different than if I'm a buyer for Nordstrom. So if I'm Walmart and I'm trying to get parts or clothes from a Nordstrom type supplier, which is high quality and high price, that's not going to go over well. All right, so that's all we've got for today. We've got a couple of questions here. So a supply management for Acme is sourcing landscaping services. She is working with the facilities manager who has a list of criteria that any supplier must meet for the landscaping. One of the items on the list is for the supplier to be able to prune the shrubs on the corporate grounds once a month. Which of the following would the supply manager consider this requirement to be most light? Anybody can take a guess here.
A specification need.
Yeah, it's going to be a need or a want. And this is often what you'll see with the ISM questions. You can almost immediately rule out two answers because it's not going to be B or D. So it's going to have to pick between A and C. And because he's spec'd it in as part of the criteria, which is part of his spec, I would say it's a need. Let's see what these guys say. Option C is correct. Pruning the shrubs on the grounds would be a basic requirement, and they've written that into their spec. All right, so Janet Jones is a category manager for Acme, and category manager is just what ISM would call a commodity manager. In the corporate world, the services industries tend to call them category managers, and the goods producing industries tend to call them commodity managers. Janet's management task with her sourcing a new water pump line for the koi ponds that Acme makes. So one of her first steps is to meet with those involved in the sourcing decision, where she found one of the requirements to be that AFAB Inc., a 3PL, which is third-party logistics, or what we would call an MSS, will be sequencing the different types of water pumps to the koi pond manufacturing line in Acme. How would you characterize AFAB Inc., this MSS?
D.
D.
Yeah. Yeah, I would go with D, because they are involved, even though they're not making anything. The decision will affect them. So let's see if that is right. D it is. The supplier is not part of the buying organization, but is an interested party in the sourcing decision. So therefore would be an external stakeholder. All right, so now you guys can go and pull down questions that look like this and do all 5 of them. And really your pace should be a question a minute. That's what the pace is in when you're actually doing the testing. But I'll go over the answers at 2:25.
Hey, Rick, can you shoot these over to me real quick?
Oh, Logan? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right.
late edition.
Sorry, I'm late to ask, but I have not received the Word file. I was just looking at the screen.
Oh, who is this?
This is Ruby.
Ruby?
Yeah.
All right. I'll give you that question back there.
Thank you.
Yeah, when you guys are done, you can just hit your raised hand too. All right, in the interest of time, let's go over the answers, and I'll post them in the chat with the questions. So if you want to go over them later, you can do that. Okay, number one is alpha or A. Correct, because the first step in the ISM sourcing process is to recognize the need. Number 2 is Bravo. Correct, because Jake should have gotten a core team together that represented all of the internal stakeholders. You could then have done a needs analysis and weighed decision criteria. 3 is Charlie. Because according to marketing, the Internet of Things connection is a want or a nice to have. 4 is Delta, because needs need to be defined in the specification. In the case of a service statement of work will function as a specification. Since everyone agrees that the ability of the ad firm to increase traffic to AFAB's website is vital, then this is a need that needs to be defined. And 5 is Charlie. When developing sourcing plans, the budget operations requirements and strategic objectives must be considered. It may be that using temp firms is a very expedient answer to hiring problem, but it may be a better deal for the company to use one large national firm instead of each location picking their own. All right, any questions? That's all I got for you today. Talk to you guys later.
So I have a
Thanks, Rick.
question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just curious, what is the difference as a number 3 as a one that is mentioned in the RFP and in the specification?
Let me take a look at that question again. This is question 3. Yeah, that one I think was not well written. Answers 21. This is the question you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, so we got marketing doesn't want the Internet of Things, engineering wants it. Defined in the spec, need that is required in the RFP. So this would be not part of the spec, but just written into the RFP. And this would be a want that was written into the RFP. And this is a want.
Sorry, I think it's, why is it that's mentioned in the RFP in 3, and then in 4, it's in the statement of work instead of the RFP. It's a need.
Okay, so
Is
we
that
got a few things going on here. The RFP is the request for proposal.
Yes.
And that's kind of an overarching document that has a spec usually attached to it. The service level agreement is really kind of something they use an indirect or a service company, and that acts as a spec. Or acts as a statement of work, really. So service level agreement and statement of work are kind of the same thing. They're really specifying what the service is. And the RFP would have one or both of them attached as a spec. So usually the RFP is just an overall document that has a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo about how we're not going to pay for any samples, that type of thing. Whereas these two or a spec, whatever you want to call it, are really detailing out what it is you're buying. And it's usually for a service, because the drawing is usually the spec for a part that we would buy. Hopefully that answers questions.
But in number 3, what is the difference with RFP and the specification as a one that is mentioned in the RFP, and as D is as a one that is defined in the specification?
So you'll see these answers a lot where they're just kind of red herrings. If you define a want in a specification, it's a need. Because you're not going to put wants in specifications. So they're just kind of throwing you off here. I mean, it's kind of a nonsense answer. Any other questions? All right. Talk to you guys tomorrow.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.